Good morning. Thank you for attending. I really appreciate everyone here. What I've got is I've got some prepared remarks that I'm going to make. At the close of my remarks, I've got some written questions that have come in over the last week that I'll respond to. And then if you would rather not ask a question, but instead write it, please write it down, get it to one of the ushers and they'll bring it up. Otherwise, if you do have a question, please raise your hand, but I ask don't ask the question until you've got the microphone. So I'll go through some prepared remarks, then I'll take some questions I've already gotten, then we'll kind of open it up and feel free to ask any question that's on your mind. Okay, let's start. First of all, Trinity is a strong congregation. We've got a lot of good things going for us. There's nothing going on secret behind the scenes. We are not losing members right, left, and center. In fact, attendance is coming back. Our programming is rebounding from COVID. Our giving, which was down, is coming back. Can we do better? Absolutely. But this is not a time of crisis. There's many signs of growth and life, and it's impressive to see that from my perspective. What I would like to do is, last week I started my discussion in terms of what went on. I started back this prior March. I think I erred in not going back further. I think it's important for me to go back to the day we held the vote as to whether we were going to call Pastor Paul. And as you're all aware, the vote was such that Paul did not get that call. At that point, there was much disappointment, there was much sadness, and I think there was bitterness. And I think that some of that has turned into maybe anger. But at the same time, in addition to Pastor Paul not being given the call, conversely, there was a group of individuals that were angry, upset, and bitter that Pastor Anderson wasn't made senior pastor. In other words, as in most human affairs, there's two sides. Some of us didn't get our way. What does that mean? What does it mean to our kids who saw that quarrel? How do we explain that to our kids about arguing and fighting in church? Well, I think that's a wonderful question, because how many here have kids that have ever seen arguing and fighting at home? Anybody? If your kids haven't seen arguing and fighting, I think you're flunking the parents department, because that's how kids learn. Congregations are families. We disagree. But now is the time to extend grace and forgiveness to one another. We've got to move on. This is done. This is done. We have to move forward. And as Christians, we are directed how to do that. We are directed to reach out to those we disagree with, that we feel wronged by. For those of you feel that I have wronged you, please reach out to me. I will ask your forgiveness. Now, let's move the calendar up to March of this year, because I'm going to address kind of rumor number one, that the church council behind the scenes decided that Pastor Paul wasn't going to cut it, so we pushed him out. That is absolutely untrue. Starting in March, the council started to talk about Pastor Paul. We started seeing some programming and some things we liked. We started working with him more and more. The discussion with the council was, you know what? Maybe when his contract is done in November, maybe we should extend to Paul a call. And in fact, Julie Anderson said it best at the May 18th council meeting. Julie said, you know, let's talk to Paul and see if he'd be amenable to a call. Clearly, the council doesn't have the authority to issue a call. That's the congregation's duty. But the council, as of the May 18th meeting, was interested in extending a call, or at least seeing if Paul would be amenable. 2 days later, Jim Koski and I met with Paul in a very positive conversation. Paul wanted a little time to think about it. Time went on, time went on, time went on. He asked for more time, and finally, as you now know, he decided and told us that he would not be interested in a call offer. Why? I don't know. I spoke to him about that several weeks before he left. What he said to me, he said, I didn't accept the call. He said, it's not because of anybody here at Trinity. I respected that. I didn't go any further. I have Paul's cell phone. If anyone wants to reach out to him and ask, I'll give you the number. So, rumor number one, no, the council did not, behind the scenes, try and drive out Pastor Paul. Next rumor. Our former president, Jim Koski. The next rumor is that Jim went behind the council's back to reach out to our interim pastor, Bob Russert, and negotiated and did the contract behind the council's back. Another rumor that is absolutely untrue. Council approved a motion for Jim to reach out to Pastor Bob and talk about a contract. Jim did that. That contract was then brought back to council, reviewed by council, and approved unanimously. There was nothing going on behind council's back. Next, not a rumor, but more of a, it wasn't a rumor, it happened. The next question or the thing I get is, Andy, I heard that Pastor Hans and Pastor Paul had a big argument. They did. And unfortunately, the argument occurred in the office here where a lot of people heard it. A lot of people, were part of the kind of that process. I am not going to get into what the arguments were about. That's a he said, she said. If you want to talk to Hans about it, talk to Paul about it, that's fine. What I do want to share with you is the next day, Pastor Hans and Pastor Paul spent a couple hours together. Really, I would use the word reconciling. From that, the relationship, from what I saw, seemed positive. And the thing that I thought was really of interest is watching the two of them up here, especially as the service was ending and they were walking down at the end of the service, watching their gestures, watching them interact with one another. That wasn't people in conflict. So, was there an altercation? Absolutely. It was unfortunate, but it happened. From what I saw, it was quick. They quickly got over that. The next thing I'm getting a lot of questions about is, when are we going to form a call committee to start looking for the next senior pastor? The short answer is, I don't know. I think we have to see as a congregation. I want to get Pastor Bob in here. He's got very, very good background, a heavy-hitting resume with dealing with congregations, with dealing with situations like we've encountered. He's got real strengths in programming. I want him to be involved in our congregation. At some point, we'll make a determination, probably by mid-year. I hope our finances will be at a point where we can bring in additional pastoral support. But maybe not. I'm not going to push it, because we don't know where our post-COVID numbers are coming in. Which then that brings me to some discussions about money and our budget. In a couple of weeks, on the 28th, we're having a congregational meeting, and you're going to be asked to review a budget and hopefully approve that budget. Now, the budget that you're going to be approving is a little different than we've done before. Specifically, we are proposing a 6-month budget. We just don't know how things are going to come back post-COVID. What that means then is we'll have another budget proposed, a meeting probably in May for the second half of the year. I'm cautiously optimistic, but I want to take this just one budget step at a time. The last point that I'd like to make before I respond to the questions is there was some concerns about money and the control of money, the counting of money, and the disbursement of money. And I think there was a legitimate concern about that because we had grown a little sloppy, and what had happened was when we take the collection on Sunday, usually what should go on is that money should be counted and handled in the presence of 2 people all the time. For those of you CPAs in the room, you can tell us that's called dual controls. We were a little sloppy about that. That has been changed. Again, it's the change we get each Sunday. The loose offering is about $38. So, but again, whether it's $2, we should be dutiful about that. I'm going to be pushing council not only to be insistent on that, but to look at all of our money practices, with all situations where money comes into the church, to ensure it's properly accounted for, properly budgeted, and properly dispersed through the budget. So you'll see more details on that. That said, I've got, now we'll switch into the question and answer phase. And I have a question that came in from last week, so I'll just read you the question. And I appreciate this question because it's pointed. The question: who will want to be on a call committee When the last committee's decision was subverted and discounted by a group of individuals who decided they could disrespect the process. So first of all, to answer the question, who would be willing to serve on a call committee in the future? That's the question. The short answer is, if I was asked, yeah, I'd serve. Let me turn it to you. How many here would be willing to serve on a call committee if you were asked? Well, I think we got enough for the call committee. That said, to the author of this question, they may have a good point. We could amend the Constitution. We could amend the Constitution such that instead of the congregation having to give a 2/3 vote to call a pastor, we could amend the Constitution to eliminate the congregational vote and give it exclusively to the call committee. We could do that if we decided. We could give a call committee, or we could give the council the ability to choose the pastor rather than the congregation. And if some of you feel strongly that we should do that, please advocate for that. We can change the Constitution if there's enough support for that. So don't think the Constitution can't be changed. It can. If you feel strongly that the call committee should have the last say, push for that.
I'm going to have to disagree. May I speak?
Briefly.
Sure. I've got to disagree with the president on that point that you can change that particular part of the Constitution. I'm the one that reviews constitutions. I actually have Trinity's in my hand here. That's a required provision requiring the congregation to have two separate votes. One is that 2/3 needed for the letter of call. I don't think God can even change that within the ELCA. That's kind of one of the primary ones. So, sorry, Andy.
Well, not to get the pastor concerned, but if those of you that are very interested in giving the call committee that authority, I guess what you'll first have to do is get the church to leave the ELCA, and then we can change the Constitution. Just kidding. I'm being rhetorical, Pastor. Okay. Questions? Jim.
We've been gone for a while, but when we left before our Egypt trip, it seemed to me that there was confusion in our mind about, is Jim still on performing the duties? And can you just explain today's current state?
With regard to Jim Koski?
Yeah.
Several weeks ago, Jim Koski submitted his resignation as president. As I've said at the other sessions, Jim just put in a tremendous amount of time and effort, and I just hope that everybody here, as they see Jim, thanks him for that. Per our Constitution, when the president steps down midterm, the council can appoint an acting president, and that's what the council did. They appointed me as acting president. Another way of looking at it is I'm sort of Gerald Ford, okay? There will be, at the congregational meeting on the 28th, an election for new members and new officers. So assuming I'm voted in, then starting January, I'll be the president. Yep. Thanks for the question. Yep. Other questions?
The previous meeting, the previous Sunday that we were supposed to be voting on a budget and officers, what has changed from that budget that supposedly was to be presented before the congregation to this new budget? What has changed?
So I'm going to, Laylene, if you give me the permission, I'm going to break that into two questions. Why didn't we vote earlier, and what's different about the new budget now? The reason we didn't meet earlier was we didn't have the budget done within the prescribed time period to notify the congregation and give you the full amount of time that prescribes in the Constitution, which I think was good because it gave us more opportunity to really delve into things. And before I get into the detail, number one, I want to thank Paul Larson for giving us the suggestion for the 6-month budget. That's where that came from. Secondly, Doug Johnson, in addition to doing wonderful Carmel rolls, is a very, very good accountant in terms of identifying things and really pointing things out that we could change, save money on, yet keep the doors open. Primarily, the big thing is we've got additional, as I alluded, revenues seem to be coming back. So we're projecting a higher level of revenue than we originally did. In addition, during COVID, we got a substantial amount of money as kind of reimbursement from Becky and the daycare. During COVID, we didn't get that. They're coming back nicely, and the daycare was very, I think, generous in providing additional income there. We have also reduced staff hours, and under the current budget, the cost for the interim pastor is only a 6-month time period. So that saves a substantial amount also. But again, I'll just caution everybody, we should be optimistic about people coming back, about giving and about programming, but we're going to be very cautious about that, and that's why we're going to revisit it in probably May to have a second meeting on the budget. Other questions?
I'm just wondering, have we really signed a contract for the interim pastor for 6 months? Pastor Hans will only be gone 3 months. I was just thinking we could save some money there unless we really feel we need 2 pastors for the second 3 months. Thank you.
Yep. The question is, we've got we do have a contract with Pastor Bob for a 6-month time period. However, there's a 60-day out clause within that contract that we could give notice and cut that short if need be. Now, let me be really clear about the timing of this. Pastor Bob is scheduled to start December 1st. He wisely, I think, insisted that there be some overlap between he and Pastor Hans at the start. How long we'll retain Bob, I don't know. That'll be up to you all. Bob's got some tremendous, as I said, credentials. I've spoken with individuals at his prior churches. For example, he's been interim up in Hackensack. Very, very, very well received. So the question of how long will retain Bob. You're going to be telling us how long you want us to retain Bob. Yeah. Matt?
Just for context, I was on the council when Pastor Dave retired, and when we were trying to go through the process of forming the call committee and whatnot, the synod suggested the council to get an interim pastor. And as a council, the council decided that we could probably save, and the interim pastor coming in to replace Pastor Dave would come in at Pastor Dave's salary. So it wouldn't change the church's budget at that time. But as a council, we decided and thought we would be able to save a fair chunk of money and forgo that and do a lot of pulpit supply pastors to come in and help relieve Pastor Hance, and then just form the call committee and continue from there. Unfortunately, I think that was a mistake that the council made. We should have gotten an interim pastor to come in and help guide us a lot better and to be there. I think having Pastor Bob, is that his name? Coming in would be a massive benefit. Yes, it's an expensive cost, but we need an outside source coming in and steering the ship. So that would be my advice.
Thanks, Matt.
Andy, I just wanted to clarify, Pastor Bob, who's coming, will not be eligible for call. If he, at the end of his contract, if we really liked him, he has indicated to us he's not eligible for a call.
Yeah, Pastor Bob retired once, and he said he wants to keep it that way. Well, before I bring this to a close, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Bud.
I don't know, somebody once said that they were never criticized for things that they didn't say, but I've got really no questions. I got some things that have been on my mind for 2 years, and if I don't get them off my chest now, I don't know what's going to happen. You say we need to move on. And like most things in life, that's easier said than done. This stew has been cooking for 2 years. Nobody saw the chaos of COVID. Nobody saw Pastor Paul's stroke. So those things are off the table as far as I'm concerned. I don't know what went on here in church. I do know there are power factions. There are in every family, there are in every church, there are in every community and organization, right up to the federal government, apparently. But for me to move on is not going to be all that easy. I remember 2 years ago when that vote happened. I went to see Pastor Paul in one of the open houses, I guess you could call it, to get to know the guy as much as you can do in that amount of time. I saw nothing to turn down his call, as has apparently been the record. Andy, you stated last week for, 400 years in this church that a call's never been turned down. But I remember being here, and I remember you standing up and saying to the congregation that you were not going to vote for this man, that you didn't know the man after two opportunities to at least come and see him. Now, when we first came to this church, Andy, I recognized you right off as somebody who wasn't afraid to take the bull by the horns, say what needed to be said. You mentioned it last week, bluntness, where bluntness is needed. And you've been that way for the 20 years I think we've been here. I respected you as a church leader, as someone whose head is screwed on tightly. But for you to stand up before that vote and to say that you were not going to vote for him because you didn't know him, I just think it was inappropriate and wrong to do that. People are sheep. They will follow. And they will follow the last thing they heard. And to drop that bomb right before that vote, and as the congregation seeing you as I've seen you as a church leader, caused them to change their minds. Well, if Andy doesn't like this guy, what's going on? And then to top things off, there was a woman who's standing right behind you on that brick wall who thought it might be appropriate to add another bomb about why he's leaving his church in Perham. And you could feel, I could feel, the change in the atmosphere of the room. Nobody stood up here and said, I'm voting for him, I'm not voting for him. And to use your influence to say that you weren't voting for him in what I feel was kind of a quasi-effort to save Hans's job was inappropriate. I didn't think Hans should have been at that meeting. It's tough to say things about Hans or about anybody in their presence. He should not have been there, up in his white robe, at the head of the congregation. And for whatever analogy that might be, it's tough, to be blunt. There was some confusion about what his role was as an associate pastor, and what the Constitution said he could do and become. But apparently, he had had his shot at the plate as far as taking the role of the senior pastor position. If he didn't know about that, he should have. Pastor Day was nearing retirement. If Pastor Hans hadn't done his homework about his future and what could be done or not done in this church, again, he should have known. And for him to sit up there and portray himself as the victim of all this shenanigans going on and bringing somebody from the outside in. Pastor Paul is a wonderful pastor in his niche, and we all have our niche. But at the point of being blunt, Pastor Paul's talents, his niche, are not in administrative duties. I know that. I think I can speak for a number of people sitting here that they know that. Oh, sorry, Pastor Hans. But I think my chest is clear. I don't know our future here for this church. I don't know our future in a lot of things. But moving on and dealing with politics in a church is not that easy to do. We enjoy coming here, enjoy being here, but I had to get these things off my chest and say some of these things. I don't think it's over. Yes, we can move on. It's a good thing to say. I don't think it's that easy to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Bud, for your candor. I can and probably should respond to one of the elements, and that is genuinely, thank you for being honest with me. I've always respected you and enjoyed you. I have reflected on my opposition, and I could have been wrong, and I could have been the author of much of this disaster. I have contemplated that, absolutely. But I fall back on that. I think my motives were pure, and I'm not going to defend myself whatsoever. But I could have been wrong, and I could have done one of the biggest disservices any one individual ever did to this congregation. That could be the case. And if that is, I ask your forgiveness. And I hope that we can continue in our fellowship together.
So I think who you have to forgive and also thanks is the call committee. Sorry, I'm an emotional person. As you know, my husband was on the call committee with a lot of other people, and no one has thanked them. And then all the stuff they went through after the vote, and I know there's people who did call and ask people not to vote. Those people should be sending an apology to everyone on that call committee.
Thank you.
I've been on a call committee, and Sherry is right. You put your heart and soul into it, and for the congregation to disregard the call committee, it's devastating. But the other part is the interim. We need an interim to get through this part, get through the loss of Dave, and the loss of Dave. The loss of Dave. We're still grieving Dave's loss. And then losing Pastor Paul, we need the interim pastor to get us going the right way and to pull us together. It's very critical. And as a person that was on a call committee and dealt with an interim pastor, it's very, very important. And if we have to dig deep in our pockets to support that, we should. Whether it takes 6 months, whether it takes a year, whatever it takes. The interim is a very, very important part of the whole healing process. So let's not try to get rid of him too soon. That's all. Thank you.
If I could make one other confession. Again, this is something I reflect on. I was asked by Pam O'Rourke if I wanted to be on the call committee. And I said to her, I said, Pam, sure, if you want me on, I'll be on. If you can't find enough people to get a balanced call committee, sign me up. So I reflect at that decision at that time. I should have said, arguably, yes. I didn't. Perhaps I had an opportunity to serve and didn't. That's a lesson to me. Paula.
2 minutes. Going back to 2 years, minus I don't remember how many weeks in between, but the next little meeting we had, Pastor Hance stood up and said that at that point, he wanted us to know that he was happy to be in the position of associate pastor, and that he at that point wasn't really interested in being the senior pastor. Because he was at the meeting where we were voting, I wish he had, but we can't go back and change. But I wish he had stood up at that time, after several of you had mentioned that you were saying what you were going to vote before we took the vote. And I wish that Pastor Hance at that time would have said, excuse me, I already put my name in, I already was looked at, and actually, honestly, I love the part of ministry I do. Pastor Hance does a wonderful job with ministry. and the names and the titles of the positions of which pastors we have and whatnot, again, was something we probably should have addressed before the day of that vote. But we didn't, and maybe we should. But I think we all need to forgive each other. We all need to look forward. We all need to do what's hopefully best and move forward. But it would have been nice if a couple of things had been done differently that day.
Yeah, let me jump in there, Paula. It makes no difference to armchair quarterback. But in a perfect world, what we should have done is before the meeting, talk to Hans, ask Hans to support the nominee, Paul, because in my view, if Hans would have stood up, first person to talk, and supported Pastor Paul for senior pastor, none of this would have occurred. We could have done it better, if we can do a time machine, but we can't. We can't. Paul.
Yeah, I'd like to just say that I want to thank Andy here for being willing to step in and provide leadership for the church. Having a listening session here is very helpful, and I think all of us want to do what's best for the church, and that's where we have to not lose the focus, and I think Andy's focused on that, is doing what's best for Trinity Church as we think and pray about it going forward. I think I'm really excited as we move forward. We can look ahead now and see what our next step in the process is. So thank you for that. That's all.
Thank you, Paul. Jan.
We have to let the past go. It's time to pull together. I am concerned, as I look around, and there are very few young people here. We have to get the young people back. And I think we can only do that with a good, strong leadership from our interim pastor. We have to let the past go, and we all have to work together.
Thank you. We got Jim.
I don't have a question, but I'll just throw out a perspective that helps people at all. I've been involved in quite a few government-style organizations. And one of the things we've done at many of them, especially in even a larger group than this, talking about a couple hundred, you can agree to disagree with somebody on their position. I understand that. But when you're debating a vote, and this is just procedural, it has nothing to do with what happened here. One of the things we've used in the past and we insist on in some of the larger groups, you rise, a lot of times you're subsets. I'm Jim D and I represent such. I rise to speak in favor of the motion. And then you have your 2 minutes. So, debate's not always pretty, but it's part of the democratic process. So, whether you agree or disagree with somebody disagreeing with the motion, that's how you debate a motion. And I think at least the process was correct, although it's like the old expression, you don't want to watch sausage or laws be made. And that's kind of what you were dealing with. It's just a perspective for you that, when the day is done, you walk out the door and you shake hands usually, hopefully.
Alicia, did you have your hand up? Yep. It's your birthday. You can do anything you want.
As all of you know, I'm Alicia Prigelmeyer, the Director of Education here. I am here faithfully, usually Tuesday through Thursday, and then at home still thinking about everything that goes on throughout the week. And I've had a lot of you approach me, so I feel like I will approach you now so we can get it out in the air. But first I'm going to say I'm a very passionate person. When I get angry, upset, or whatever, you'll see tears, so I apologize. But I just want you to know that these past couple years have been hard. They have been hard on the staff. COVID has been hard on all of us, and I have tried my very best to keep this church afloat for all of you. I have gotten some not so nice comments to me of why I do things during COVID, but I'm doing it for this church. I'm doing it for all of you, and I'm doing my very best to get the families to come back. But this past summer put a whole new perspective on me of what can happen. And I want to let you know that because of Pastor Paul and Pastor Hans's meeting, that was mainly about me. And I carry guilt every day about that. And I know a lot of you have come and asked about it, but Pastor Paul shared some stuff that he shouldn't have with Pastor Hans, and it just blew up. And I carry that guilt every day because it was mainly about me. And so you can't be, just so you know, is that I don't want you guys to carry anger to Hans, and I don't want you to be upset with Pastor Paul. It is what it is, and we tried to work it out. But things are shared with one another, hoping that things won't get shared to other people. And that's what happened with Pastor Paul and Pastor Hans. And like I said, I carry a lot of guilt, but I think we need to move forward. We need to do what we need to do to get this church back up to where it was. When I started, when Pastor Dave was here, I had over 90 Sunday school families. And right now I have 33. So that breaks my heart. I tried trunk or treat, and we get a huge response with that. The live nativity, different things to get families here. But I just want everybody to know that my heart is in here, and I'm doing my best every single day to keep us alive. And I want you to know that myself, Becky, Linda, and Pastor Hans and everybody else, we work on a daily basis to keep this church alive. And we're doing our very best. And I want to say with the interim, I have met him a couple times, and he is amazing. And everybody needs to open their heart and allow him to come in and do what he needs to do. Because I know a few of you think that Pastor Hans can do this on his own, and he can't. We have confirmation, we have First Communion, and we have other things that he needs to be here for. And we need somebody else to step in and help, because one person can't do it all. As you can see today, there's been people trying to get me to come out for Sunday school and whatever else. We can't all do everything all by ourselves. It takes a village. And so I need everybody to open their hearts and be welcoming to Pastor Bob and give him a chance, because that is what we need right now. Thank you.
Could I get a volunteer to give her a hug? That's from all of us.
I want to publicly say thank you for all of you who have been praying for me for 10 or 15 years. The rest of you have been with masks for about a year or two. I've been with a mask for at least a decade. I am so thankful to finally be healthy and to be able to be out and about without a mask and not get sick from every little possible thing that can float around in the air. I am always aware about germs. As someone in the dental profession, I was up to my elbows in I was in germs and air contaminated things all the time. Alicia, I'm going to give you a hug.
Any other questions? Well, at risk of repeating something said earlier, go in peace and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.